Edgefield District, South Carolina, March 14th and 47th. A woman named only as Celia in the plantation ledger gave birth in the quarters Thomas main house while fitted with iron restraints at both ankles. When the midwife lifted the newborn, a girl, the child's right hand was closed tight around a gold signet ring bearing the Whitmore family crest. No one present could explain how the ring came to be there, and Thomas Whitmore reported it stolen 3 days prior. Within 6 weeks, 2 people were dead. The child had vanished from all records, and Celia stood trial not for theft, but for something the court would not name in official transcripts. Question was never what happened in that room. The question was what the ring proved, and who would be held accountable for that proof. This is the Bondage Chronicles. Subscribe to follow stories the historical record tried to bury. Now let's return to where it began. Celia was bent over the wash trough when her water broke, and she did not stop working. The other women saw it. Mary first, then Patience, then Ruth, who was hanging linens on the fence line, but no one spoke. Celia straightened, gripped the edge of the wooden trough with both hands, and waited for the contraction to pass. The water was cold. Her hands were cracked and bleeding at the knuckles from lye soap. She had been washing since dawn, and there were still 12 more sheets in the basket. She released the trough, picked up the next sheet, and submerged it. Mary moved closer but did not touch her. Celia shook her head once, a small motion, and Mary stepped back. They had been told the night before that if the washing was not finished by midday, rations would be cut for the week. It was nearly noon. The overseer, a man named Haskell, came into the yard at 12:15. Slowly, hands behind his back, eyes moved across each woman as though counting. He stopped at Celia's trough. She was wringing out a pillowcase, twisting the fabric hard, water streaming onto the dirt. He watched her for a long moment, then looked into the basket. 11 sheets remained. Haskell said nothing. He walked to the fence, checked the drying linens, then returned to the main house. Celia bent forward again, gripping the trough, her breath shallow and controlled. When he was gone, Ruth asked if she should fetch the midwife. Celia said no. She said it clearly without looking up. Mary glanced toward the main house, then back at Celia, but she did not argue. By 2 o'clock, Celia could no longer stand upright. She finished the last sheet on her knees, pulling it from the trough and dragging it to the fence. Patience took it from her hands without asking and hung it herself. Celia remained on the ground, palms flat against the dirt. The contractions were close now, less than 2 minutes apart. Mary went to find the midwife, an older woman named Esther who worked in the main house kitchen. Esther came quickly, carrying a cloth bundle. She knelt beside Celia, touched shoulder, and said they needed to move her to the quarters. Celia shook her head. She said Haskell had told her to stay in the yard until the work was checked. Esther looked at the empty basket, then at the drying linens, then back at Celia. She did not argue either. The quarters where Celia lived were single-room cabins, arranged in 2 rows behind the main house, each shared by 4 or 6 people, depending on family groupings and field assignments. Celia had been assigned to the 3rd cabin in the east row for nearly 3 years, sharing the space with 2 women and an elderly man who worked in the stables. The walls were pine planks, chinked with clay and moss. There were no windows. The door was made of scrap lumber and hung crooked on leather hinges. Inside, there were 2 straw pallets, a wooden box for belongings, and a fire pit in the center with a hole cut through the roof for smoke. The floor was packed dirt. Celia owned 3 items: a wool blanket issued 2 winters prior, a tin cup, and a small wooden comb with several teeth missing. She had been told the cabin would be searched once a month without notice, and any item not listed in the plantation inventory would be confiscated and the occupant punished. Esther and Mary helped Celia into the cabin just after 3 o'clock. They laid her on the pallet farthest from the door. Esther sent Mary to fetch clean rags and a bucket of water from the well. While Mary was gone, Esther examined Celia and said the child was coming soon, possibly within the hour. Celia asked if Esther had told anyone. Esther said no. Celia asked if she had sent word to the main house. Esther said not yet. Celia gripped Esther's wrist and said not to send word. Esther pulled her hand back gently and said the master required notification of all births, and that failure to notify him could result in punishment for both of them. Celia said nothing. Mary returned with the rags and water. Esther set the bucket beside the pallet and told Mary to stay near the door and watch for anyone approaching. At 3:30, Haskell appeared in the doorway. He did not enter. He stood with one hand on the frame, looking at Celia on the pallet, then Esther, then back at Celia. He asked if the child had been born. Esther said not yet. He asked how much longer. Esther said she did not know, possibly an hour, possibly more. Haskell nodded slowly. He said Master Whitmore wanted to be informed the moment the birth occurred, and that Esther was to come to the main house immediately afterward. He did not explain why. Esther said she understood. Haskell looked at Celia again, his expression unreadable, then stepped back and walked toward the main house. Mary watched him go, then to Esther and asked quietly why the master wanted to know so quickly. Esther did not answer. Over Celia and checked the progression again. Thomas Whitmore had owned the plantation for 11 years, inheriting it from his father, along with 42 enslaved people, 600 acres of cotton, and debts totaling nearly $8,000. He was 34 years old, unmarried, and lived alone in the main house, except for 2 house servants who slept in the kitchen. He kept detailed records of every expense, every birth, every death, and every disciplinary action. His ledger listed Celia's arrival in 1844, purchased from an estate sale in Charleston for $320. The entry noted her age as approximately 19, her health as good, and her skills as adequate for field work and laundry. There was no mention of family, prior ownership, place of origin. The ledger did not record personal histories. It recorded value, productivity, and cost. 3 days before Celia went into labor, Whitmore reported to Haskell that his signet ring was missing. The ring was gold, engraved with the Whitmore family crest, and had belonged to his father. Whitmore said he last saw it on his desk in the study on the evening of March 11th. When he went to wear it the following morning, it was gone. He questioned both house servants, a woman named Dinah and a younger girl named Bess, but both denied taking it or seeing anyone else near the study. Whitmore instructed Haskell to search the quarters. Haskell conducted the search on March 13th, going through each cabin methodically, emptying boxes, lifting pallets, checking beneath floorboards. He found nothing. Whitmore told Haskell to continue watching and to report any unusual behavior. He did not specify what he meant by unusual. Celia had not been in the main house for 6 months. Her work assignment had been changed in September after she was found in the hallway outside the study one evening. Whitmore had questioned her about why she was there. She said Dinah had sent her to retrieve a serving tray. Dinah, when asked, confirmed this, accepted the explanation, but reassigned Celia to outdoor work the next day. She had not entered the main house since. Haskell noted this in his report to Whitmore on March 13th. After finding nothing in the search, Whitmore asked if Celia had been behaving differently in recent weeks. Haskell said she kept to herself, worked adequately, and caused no trouble. Whitmore said to keep watching her specifically. Haskell did not ask why. The child was born at 4:47 in the afternoon. Esther caught her, cleared her airway, and wrapped her in a clean rag. The infant did not cry immediately. Esther turned her over, rubbed her back firmly, and the child gasped and began to wail. Mary moved closer to see. Esther was holding the infant with both hands, staring down at the tiny clenched fist. She tried to open the fingers gently. The child's grip was tight. Esther worked one finger loose, then another, and something small and metallic dropped onto the rag. It rolled slightly, catching the light from the doorway. Mary saw it first and stepped back. Esther picked it up, close to her face, and went completely still. It was a gold ring with an engraved crest. Celia was still on the pallet, breathing hard, eyes closed. Esther looked at her, then at Mary, then back at the ring in her palm. She asked Mary to leave. Mary did not move. Esther said it again, and Mary stepped outside. Esther knelt beside Celia and held the ring in front of her face. Celia opened her eyes, looked at it, and said nothing. Esther asked her how it got there. Celia did not answer. Esther asked again, her voice low and urgent. Celia turned her head toward the wall. Esther closed her hand on the ring and stood. She wrapped the infant tightly, placed her beside Celia on the pallet, and went to the door. Mary was standing just outside, arms staring at the ground. Esther told her to stay with Celia and not let anyone inside until she returned. Mary nodded. Esther walked quickly toward the main house. Whitmore was in his study when Esther arrived. Haskell was with him, standing near the window. Esther knocked, waited, and entered when told. She stood just inside the doorway, hands folded in front of her. Whitmore looked up from his desk. Esther said the child had been born a girl, healthy. Whitmore asked about Celia. Esther said she was weak but stable. Whitmore nodded and made a note in his ledger. Esther did not move. Whitmore looked at her again and asked if there was something else. Esther hesitated, then opened her hand and held out the ring. Whitmore stood slowly. Haskell moved from the window. Neither man spoke. Whitmore took the ring from his palm, examined it closely, then set it on the desk. He asked where she found it. Esther said it was in the child's hand. Whitmore looked at her without expression. He asked her to repeat that. Esther did, word for word. Haskell asked if anyone else had seen it. Esther said Mary had been present. Whitmore told Haskell to bring Mary to the study immediately and to make sure no one else entered Celia's cabin. Haskell left. Whitmore sat back down, picked up the ring, and turned it slowly between his fingers. He asked Esther if Celia had said anything about the ring. Esther said no. He asked if been conscious when it was discovered. Esther said yes. Whitmore set the ring down again and told Esther to return to the cabin and stay with Celia until he sent further instructions. Esther asked if she should bring the child to the main house for inspection, as was customary. Whitmore said no. He said no one was to touch the child or move her. Esther nodded and left. Mary was brought to the study 10 minutes later. Haskell stood beside her while Whitmore questioned her. She confirmed what Esther had said. The ring had been in the infant's hand at birth, and she had seen Esther remove it. Whitmore asked if Mary had touched the ring. She said no. He asked if she had Celia with the ring before the birth. She said no. He asked if Celia had said anything about it. Mary said Celia had not spoken at all. Whitmore dismissed her and told Haskell to make sure she did not speak to anyone about what she had seen. Haskell escorted her out. Whitmore sat alone in the study for nearly 20 minutes. staring at the ring on his desk. Then he stood, locked the study door, and walked to the quarters. Celia was asleep when Whitmore entered the cabin. The infant was beside her, wrapped tightly, eyes closed. Esther stood near the door. Whitmore told her to leave. Esther glanced at Celia, then at the child, then walked out without speaking. Whitmore stood over the pallet, looking down at Celia. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. He did not touch her. He looked at the child for a long moment, then turned and left the cabin. Outside, he told Haskell to have iron restraints brought from the barn and fitted to Celia's ankles. Haskell asked if she was being charged with theft. Whitmore said not yet. He said the restraints were precautionary, to prevent her from leaving until the matter was investigated further. Haskell nodded and went to retrieve the irons. The restraints were fitted an hour later, while Celia was still unconscious. They were standard field restraints, iron cuffs connected by a 2-foot chain, locked at each ankle. When Celia woke, she tried to sit up and felt the weight immediately. She looked down, saw the irons, and went still. Esther was sitting near the fire pit. Celia asked her what had happened. Esther said the master had ordered the restraints, and that she was not to leave the cabin under any circumstance. Celia asked where the child was. Esther pointed to the pallet. The infant was still sleeping. Celia reached for her, pulled her close, and said nothing else. 2 days passed. Celia remained in the cabin, restrained, with Esther bringing food and water twice daily. The child was healthy, nursing well, and showed no signs of distress. Whitmore did not return to the cabin, but Haskell checked on Celia each morning and evening, standing in the doorway, asking if she needed anything. She never answered. On the 3rd day, Whitmore sent for the county sheriff, a man named Clayton Burke, and requested a formal investigation into the theft of his ring. Burke arrived on March 17th, accompanied by a clerk who took notes. Whitmore explained that the ring had been stolen from his study and recovered under circumstances that implicated Celia directly. He did not initially explain what those circumstances were. Burke asked to question Celia. Whitmore agreed and led him to the quarters. Celia was sitting on the pallet when Burke entered, the child in her arms. Burke introduced himself and asked if she understood why he was there. Burke asked if she had taken the ring from Whitmore's study. Celia did not respond. Burke asked how the ring came to be in the child's hand. Celia looked at him directly for the first time and said she did not know. Burke asked if anyone else had access to the cabin before the birth. Celia said no. Burke asked if she hid the ring in her clothing or on her person. Celia said she had never touched the ring. Burke glanced at Whitmore, then back at Celia. He asked her to explain, in her own words, how an object reported stolen from the main house 3 days before the child's birth could be found in the infant's hand immediately after delivery. Celia said she could not explain it. Burke stood, told the clerk to note her refusal to cooperate, and left the cabin. Outside, Burke spoke with Whitmore privately. He said the evidence was unusual, but that theft was theft, and that Celia's possession of the ring, however it had been recovered, was sufficient grounds for prosecution. Whitmore asked what charges Burke recommended. Burke said theft of property valued over $50, which carried a penalty of public whipping or imprisonment. Whitmore said nothing for a moment, then asked if there were other charges that might apply. Burke looked at him carefully and asked what he meant. Whitmore said he wanted the full scope of the law applied, not just theft. Burke asked if Whitmore was suggesting something beyond theft had occurred. Whitmore said he was suggesting that the circumstance warranted a broader investigation. Burke he would need more specific information. Whitmore said he would provide it in writing. The formal complaint was filed on March 19th. It charged Celia with theft, but included an additional clause that referenced conduct unbecoming and injurious to the moral order of the household. The language was vague, deliberately so, and noted in his report that Whitmore had requested the clause personally. The trial was set for April 12th in the Edgefield courthouse. Celia would remain restrained in the cabin until then. The infant, who had not been named in any official record, would remain with her. Whitmore instructed Esther to continue providing care, but to report any visitors or unusual behavior immediately. Esther agreed. She asked what would happen to the child if Celia was convicted. Whitmore said that had not been determined. Esther asked if the child would be registered in the plantation ledger. Whitmore said no. The trial opened on a clear morning with 14 people in attendance. Judge Harrison Talmadge presiding, Sheriff Burke, 2 clerks, Whitmore and his lawyer, without representation, Esther and Mary as witnesses, and 5 white men from neighboring properties who served as the jury. Celia was brought into the courthouse, still wearing the restraints, which were not removed during the proceedings. The infant was left in the cabin under the watch of another woman. Celia stood at the front of the room, hands clasped, eyes forward. Judge Talmadge read the charges aloud. Theft of property and conduct injurious to moral order. He asked how Celia pleaded. She said nothing. Talmadge repeated the question. Celia, she did not take the ring. Talmadge noted her plea not guilty and instructed Burke to present the evidence. Burke called Esther first. She testified that she had removed the ring from the infant's hand immediately after birth and had given it directly to Whitmore. She was asked if there was any possibility the ring had been placed in the child's hand after birth. She said no, the child's had been closed when she was born, and Esther had to pry the fingers open. She was asked if Celia had said anything about the ring. Esther said no. She was asked if Celia had appeared surprised when shown the ring. Esther hesitated, then said Celia had not reacted visibly. Burke thanked her and called Mary next. Mary's testimony matters in every detail. She confirmed seeing the ring fall from the infant's hand, and Celia had not spoken about it. Burke asked if Mary had noticed anything unusual about Celia's behavior in the days leading up to the birth. Mary said. Burke asked if Celia had been in the main house recently. Mary said not to her knowledge. Burke dismissed her. Whitmore was called next. He testified that the ring had been in his study on the evening of March 11th and missing the following morning. He said the study was locked each night, and that only he and then the 2 house servants had access. He said both servants had been questioned and cleared. He was asked if he had any explanation for how the ring could have ended up in the infant's hand. Whitmore paused, but Celia looked at Celia, but preferred not to state it publicly without further. Talmadge told him to state it. Whitmore said he believed Celia had taken the ring during a previous visit to the main house, concealed it on her person, and that it had somehow transferred to the child during birth. He did not explain the mechanism of transfer. He was asked if he had proof of Celia entering the study. He said she had been found in the hallway near the study 6 months prior, which established opportunity. He was asked if there was any other evidence linking her to the theft. He said the recovery of the ring from the child was evidence enough. Celia was not called to testify on her own behalf. Judge Talmadge asked if she wished to make a statement. She said she did not take the ring and did not know how it came to be in the child's hand. Talmadge asked if she had been in the study on March 11th. She said no. He asked if she had been in the main house at all in the 6 months prior to the birth. She said no. He asked if anyone could corroborate this. She said the other women in the quarters would confirm she had been assigned to outdoor work exclusively. Talmadge asked if she wanted those women called as witnesses. Celia looked at the jury, then at Whitmore, and said no. Talmadge closed her statement and instructed the jury to deliberate. The jury left the room for 18 minutes. When they returned, the foreman stood and delivered the verdict, guilty of theft. Judge Talmadge if they had reached a conclusion on the second charge. The foreman said they had not, as the language of the charge was unclear, and they did not feel they had sufficient evidence to convict on conduct alone. Talmadge accepted the verdict on theft and dismissed the second charge. He sentenced Celia to 20 lashes, to be administered publicly in 3 days' time. He also ruled that the infant, as the product of an enslaved woman, remained the property of Thomas Whitmore and could be disposed of as he saw fit. Celia did not react. She was led out of the courthouse and returned to the cabin. The whipping was carried out on April 15th in the yard behind the main house. All enslaved people on the plantation were required to attend. Celia was tied to a post, her back exposed. Haskell administered the lashes with a leather strap. She did not cry out. After the 10th lash, she lost consciousness. Esther was permitted to tend to her wounds afterward. The restraints were removed following the punishment, as the sentence had been fulfilled. Celia was carried back to the cabin and laid on the pallet. The infant was returned to her. Esther cleaned the wounds and wrapped Celia's back in cloth soaked in salve. Celia regained consciousness 2 hours later. She asked for the child. Esther placed the infant in her arms. Celia held her close and said nothing. 3 days after the whipping, the infant disappeared. Esther went to the cabin in the morning to bring food and found Celia alone. Esther asked where the child was. Celia said she was gone. Esther asked what that meant. Celia said the child had been taken during the night. Esther asked by whom. Celia said she did not know. Esther asked if Celia had heard anything. Celia said no. Esther went immediately to the main house and reported the disappearance to Whitmore. Whitmore said he was aware. Esther asked what had happened to the child. Whitmore said the matter had been resolved privately and that Esther was not to discuss it further. Esther asked if the child was alive. Whitmore did not answer. Esther returned to the cabin and Celia what Whitmore had said. Celia asked no questions. 2 weeks later, Esther died. The official record listed the cause as sudden illness, symptoms unspecified. She was found in her sleeping quarters early in the morning, unresponsive. No one had heard her call for help. There was no investigation. Her body was buried the same day, reserved for enslaved people behind the eastern field. Mary attended the burial. Celia did not. Mary asked Haskell if she could speak to Celia afterward. Said no. Mary asked why. Haskell said Celia was no longer on the plantation. Mary asked where she had gone. Haskell said she had been sold to a buyer in Georgia 2 days prior. Mary asked if that was before or after Esther's death. Haskell did not answer. The plantation ledger for 1847 shows the following entries. Celia sold April $260 to a private buyer, name not recorded. 1 female infant, born March 8th, deceased April 18th, cause unspecified. Esther, deceased April 26th, illness. No further notes appear regarding the ring, the trial, or the investigation. Whitmore's personal correspondence from that period includes a letter dated May 3rd to his cousin in Charleston. in which he mentions resolving a delicate matter in household property and the necessary removal of certain complications. He does not elaborate. The signet ring appears in a probate inventory when Whitmore's estate was settled in 1869, lit among his personal effects with no indication of its history. Court records from Edgefield County, Celia's trial transcript, but second charge conduct injurious to moral order was stricken from the final record with no explanation. Sheriff Burke's report includes a handwritten note added later that reads, "Matter concluded per the request of T. Whitmore. No further inquiry warranted." The note is unsigned. In 1872, a researcher compiling census data for formerly enslaved people in South Carolina found a woman named Celia living in Augusta, Georgia, who claimed to have been sold from a plantation in Edgefield 847. When asked if she had children, she said no. When asked if she had ever been charged with a crime, she said she did not remember. The researcher did not press further. The infant was never named in any legal or personal document. No birth certificate was issued. No death certificate exists. The only reference to her is the single line in Whitmore's ledger, which lists her birth 4 days apart. There is no record of burial, no grave marker, and no account between April 14th and April 18th. The entry simply ends,